Welcome to the Cutting Onions podcast. My name is Bobby Shaw. On today's episode, I speak with marketing icon Dan Fogarty. Dan founded his agency, Call Fogarty, a few years ago and has a mission to help cool companies become cult brands. Before starting his own company, Dan certainly had a lot of experience doing just that for brands like Rock Bottom, Chipotle, and Noodles & Company. I was fortunate enough to get to work with Dan for several of my years at Chipotle, and myself, along with many other leaders, saw some of the most iconic branding and advertising messaging to ever come out of a restaurant company. And oh, by the way, did that on a shoestring budget. It was an amazing experience to be a part of during those times at Chipotle. And in those days, watching that grassroots marketing effort take hold is really what helped crystallize the brand loyalty that we began to see from so many of our guests. In this episode, we talk about a lot of things, including an Entrepreneur magazine article that Dan contributed to a few weeks ago, where he outlined some of the tactics that he and his team used to help spread the word about Chipotle in those early days. But as all good conversations do, it took on a life of its own, and we talked about so many other things that impacted the way that we built the brand at Chipotle, specifically talking about how marketing influences culture and culture influences marketing, and how that all ties together with the operations of a great running restaurant. This was an amazing conversation, and I'm so grateful that Dan took the time to spend an hour with me unpacking these ideas and being able to talk about what made Chipotle so successful in those early days and how that's helped really change the world. So without any more delay, here's the conversation that I had with Dan Fogarty. I hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you on the other side. Well, Dan, again, I really appreciate you joining the podcast, and it means a lot to me that you would do that. And I just wanted to kind of, talk through some of the things that, some of what you talked about in the article, but some other things too, as we kind of look at the industry, and you mentioned it. I mean, this last year has been crazy town. For everyone. And, would also love to hear more about what you're doing and, hear about your agency and what you're hoping to do. And, I'll put this out there, and hopefully as many people as possible will be able to download it and we'll be able to listen to it. But man, I really appreciate you making the time. So
no, it's the other way around, man. I really do. And the best part is having talking to you because you went through it all and you know it, versus like someone coming in from the cold, and it's like, all the problems that we went through and all the stuff we had to solve. I mean, it was breaking new trail.
It was. I mean, I'll never forget the day you came into Waldo, and I was working, and I hadn't been with the company very long. This was probably 2002 or 3. And I remember you coming in during lunch, and you were in town for something. I can't remember what you were in town for, but you were so gracious. You made the time to ask me how things were going, how things were working, did it make sense, and that was awesome, especially for...
Really? I wasn't a dick?
You were not.
Okay, good.
And you came in right in the middle of lunch too. And I'm like, oh, sweet Jesus, Dan Fogarty's here. I'm like, oh my God, but
I thought you were going to go and you know what you said to me?
Exactly. No, it was actually really good. What was really funny about that story is I had just pulled off the floor, not like 2 minutes before you walked in the door. I'm like, son of a bitch. He's going to call Gretchen and say, Bobby Shaw was off the floor at Waldo. It was like 1:30. But no, it was really cool. In those early days, especially, for, someone like me as a young area manager, almost 20 years ago, to have someone come in and even care, to ask was a huge deal. So I really appreciate it.
Well, and you guys, man, you were guinea pigs for us. I mean, you are our first time outside the market, branding, creating a whole new thing, educating the market. I mean, you guys really built up a really cool thing there. And how hard it was when we first opened there. Yeah,
absolutely. Ben and I talk about this. I had coffee with him a few weeks ago. Ben Neese, who was our LSM.
Yeah, we're still in touch today.
Yeah, and we were just talking about it, and just talking about when people say grassroots, like they don't really know what that
No.
means, now, with technology and everything else they have, and, also the huge budgets, and, which is one thing I thought was interesting with Kevin's article before you even started to chime in was, and he made an excellent point. It's like, I get it. When people have huge budgets, I mean, I know why they spend the money they spend, right? On whatever they spend on, Super Bowl ads or huge things. But why wouldn't you do the smaller things, And I know we didn't have a choice.
Yeah, it was a necessity for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what is something that you think about when you think about those early days, Dan, and the things that we did? And like you said, we had to do those things, but how did they help us? Like, what are the things that it did for us, do you think, as you look back now?
Well, I think there's a lot of figuring out as we were flying the plane, that's for sure. Everyone forgets, but back then it was really crappy fast food. Like all the fast food chains were promoting was a price point. It was 99 cents, 99 cents, right?
Right.
And then you had bad or mediocre chain restaurants, and then you had kind of just mom and pop restaurants. There was no fast casual. No one knew what a gourmet burrito was. So we had to teach people about the whole category, that you could have food served fast,
Right.
but that was really good. And that was unheard of. And now it's incredible what you can get. But back then it was like, we had to teach people that you could get really good fast food, because we all hated chains.
Yep.
None of us that worked at Chipotle, we were all anti-chain, yet we were a chain. As we grew, and then we're like, well, let's prove that a chain could be good. So I think that became kind of the touch point of everything that we did, particularly from a culture standpoint, to kind of teach people about that. We had to teach people how to cook.
Right.
Before, it was everyone got their food in boxes. It was cooked somewhere else, or they put it in a machine and pressed the button until it beeped. And that's what all chain restaurants were. So we had to teach people how to cook. I remember the McDonald's guys thought it was really dangerous that we had knives in our restaurant. It's just crazy to think about then, but that's how dumb the whole system had been dumbed down over time. Was they're like, we can't have knives. People will cut themselves.
It's so funny. It's so funny. After I left Chipotle in 2012, I went to work for a smaller regional chain, 100 restaurants, and in Austin, Texas, and I ran that for about 3.5 years. And I remember going into the restaurants, and they were not cooking chicken on the grill. This was also a burrito restaurant and a Mexican restaurant, fast casual. And they're like, "Oh, we can't cook chicken on the grill." I'm like, "What?" I'm like, "Why not?" And like, "Oh, no, it's way too dangerous. Like, we cannot have people cooking on a hot grill." And I'm like, oh boy. I'm like, well, I hate to tell you, but I've been doing it for 10 years of my life. So I can tell you we can do it and we will do it. But you're right. It is so funny about what people think they can and can't do. And they really limit themselves by doing that.
Yeah. And we had to educate people too about, besides having a name that no one could pronounce.
Correct.
We had to, if you look at a lot of the stuff that we did early on, it was to solve a problem. So if you look at the original Chipotle logo that had the foil burrito, we did that because we would open up in a new market like Dallas, and I've told this story, I think it was in that article, and people would call up for reservations, or I remember going to Dallas and everyone had a knife and fork and was cutting the burritos open, and so like we had to, like, the logo had to say, this is what we're selling.
Right. Well, and I know we went through different iterations. Like in Dallas, I know we had signs that said burritos and tacos, right?
Yeah.
We had some of that. I think we may have had one or two of those in Kansas City too. But yeah, we did. We went through several iterations. You're right. Just to try to educate people as they were driving by, like, what in the world were we, Yeah.
Yeah. And then we had to kind of go through that whole, as you saw it, those painful early days in Texas with everyone going, this isn't Mexican food, this isn't Tex-Mex. And I'm like, we're not saying it is.
Nope. Exactly. I mean, you're absolutely right. I remember distinctly when I got to San Antonio, when I moved down to Austin in 2005, and I took over in Austin, Houston, San Antonio. I went to San Antonio, and People could have cared less we were there. They didn't know anything about us. They weren't interested in it. And it was really that education process. I remember William Espy came down and, we rallied the whole team down there and got them together, because I'm not even sure our internal team was completely versed in it. You know what I mean? Like, when we got there, when I got there. And so it's like, okay, we got to get everyone together in a room because nobody really understands what we're doing here. So those were some really interesting times for sure.
Yeah, I remember, I don't know if you were down there then, but like when we opened in Austin, I mean, it was a dud, even more of a dud than Kansas City, which was also a dud in the early days.
Right.
But Austin, I mean, we had the prime location right across from the university and $900 a day in sales.
I got there a couple of years after that, Dan, and even when I got there, it was starting to turn, but it was still, I remember Lakeline Mall, right across from the mall. They had just punched that toll road through, and, people were starting to come in, people were starting to trickle in, things were getting a little bit busier at UT, things were starting to turn around. But even in those days, when I got there, it was still not a huge market at all. It was definitely interesting to educate the guest at the same time as we were educating everyone who worked for us. It was, that was my challenge, when I took over down there.
And Kansas City was our first expansion outside the market. And I remember, we were the it thing in Denver. Like it was lines out the door at every single restaurant. It was the bomb. And then I'm like, okay, we got to open up on 39th Street in Kansas City.
Yep.
That's a cool restaurant thing. No chains would go there, and we're cool. And we moved in there, and we were so hated.
39th and Bell.
I'm like, it's me. I'm from Kansas City.
That's right. Exactly.
We want to be cool. There's this great food. You're going to like it. And it was like, that was like one of the first early anti-chain kind of movements. And it took a long time to convince people. And we did that through you guys and giving out food. And then finally we turned the tide. But it was a very dry days.
Well, 39th Street, I'm really glad you brought that up, because that was such an important location for us in so many ways. In fact, when we opened Berry Road, which, was north, as obviously being from here, up north, we had people, I mean, it was so funny. I remember telling Matt Scheinman, Matt, when we open Berry Road, people from 39th Street who live closer to there, I mean, people who come here now are going to go there because they live closer to Berry Road. He's like, there is no way. And I'm like, I'm telling you, Matt, I've driven this 100 times and I'm telling you, people are going to go. And sure enough, like we had people driving from the Northland down to Bell. It was crazy because it was literally at the time, it was the closest one that you could go to, in order to catch Chipotle. And so when we opened Berry Road, it was just, of course, it was huge, just huge. Yeah. But, people, at the time we were still building up density and, getting more stores opened. And it was really interesting to watch how far people would travel for our food.
And it's weird. That's where I learned the great lesson in all of that too, was how each location really helps build the sales and lifts up the boats of all the other ones. And it's strange stuff like that. Or one of our, I would go all over the country when we would open a new market and people go, oh, I went to a restaurant in Colorado. Every single person said 32nd and Youngfield. And I'm like, how in the world, which is in Denver, that is like, you have to know it's there. There's no thing. It's hard to get off the highway, but it's next to the highest volume liquor store. So everyone stopped at Applejack's on the way to the mountains.
There you go.
And it was just crazy to go into Cincinnati and people going, oh, we go to the 32nd and Youngfield store all the time. How did you know that? But it just shows that each one of those, or like in the early days when we opened up in Austin, we would give out postage paid because there wasn't email then. Oh, really? But we would give out postage paid cards that said, do you have and it was the Austin skyline with a burrito in it. We're like, do you have friends in Austin? Send them a free burrito. And so we would use people in Denver to build our sales in a new market, which was surprisingly effective. It was amazing how that did.